Hi guys, welcome back. Today is oil change time again. Those of you who've been keeping an eye on my videos recently will know that a couple of weeks back I did an oil system flush, and it's my strong recommendation if you're going to do that you always remember that some of the flush chemical will remain in the oil, in the pipes of the engine, in the oil pump, the oil cooler, whatever it's going to be. There'll be a little bit of it remains that contaminates the new oil, so after you've done an oil flush it's a good idea to top it up with cheap sacrificial oil, and after a couple of hundred miles basically change that out for the real stuff. That's what we're doing today, but I'm going to do this as a complete beginner's video, assuming no prior knowledge of mechanics, because this really is something that just about anyone can do. Anyone who's just got one or two sockets, that's all you need. Nothing complicated, nothing scary, just important that you make sure you've got all the bits in advance and take your time. So let's go through what we're going to need here. There's a few consumables. First things first, and I guess this is the biggie, is the oil itself. A few points to note. The oil that you take out of your engine is not necessarily the same as the oil that needs to go back in. There might be too much in, it might have been overfilled, topped up by people that didn't check the dipstick. It could be that it was massively underfilled. You need to look at your owner's manual, find out how much should go in the engine, and make sure that you have at least that much, although we're not going to put it all in one go. We're going to put it in gradually, check the dipstick regularly, and make sure we're not accidentally overfilling. Remember that there will be some oil left in the system. Next, and very importantly, is the filter. You need to change your filter absolutely every time you change your oil, no exceptions to that ever. And in the filter there should be not just the filter, it might have a metal casing around it, might be a slightly different type, but with the D5 engine it's a paper filter. You also get a new O-ring that goes onto the inside of the threaded section of this, which is the plastic cap on the oil filter assembly itself. So very important to make sure you've got a new O-ring. We're going to need to replace that. It's helpful to have a little plastic picker, although you'll be able to wheedle it out with metal pickers, an old nail, a pair of long nose pliers, whatever you've got really. You just got to be very, very careful that you don't scratch the plastic here, because that could result in a leak. You use a plastic picker, that's not possible. So useful little tool, we'll keep that safe in the box with the filter for now. So that's the filter. On the bottom of the engine, of course, we've got a drain plug. Now, here's one that I took off last time. I tend to replace the plug and the gasket, but you can get replacement gaskets. What's important to note, I'll see if I can zoom in on this, is that these are one-use gaskets. If you look at this one, you can see that it's actually dented on the inside, and unless you can ensure that that perfectly lines up with the original position against the sump, which you can't, then this could well leak, and bearing in mind that it's the lowest point in the engine nearest down it, you really don't want that to happen. So get yourself a nice copper washer, or just a replacement kit, which is a new bolt, and the gasket comes with that. Don't forget that. Now this car is an older car, so oil alone doesn't quite cut it anymore. The cylinder rings are very worn. It's done about 170 odd thousand miles, so I'm going to put some heavy duty oil stabiliser as well into the system. This is part of the 6.5 litres that this engine takes. Okay, so I'm going to have to compensate for that. So in total, if I hadn't been using the oil stabiliser, this would have been enough. As it is, that 5 litres plus this 1 litre of stabiliser means that I'm likely to need a top up, but that suits me well because it means that I have then absolute control over what should be the region between the middle of the dipstick and the top of the dipstick. Nice and simple. Okay, so this is a pretty standard collection pan. It's got a spout on the end that allows you then to pour it off into whatever container you're going to use for your old waste oil. I tend to use this, which is an old 15 litre diesel tank. Handy enough, nice and easy to decant into the waste oil down at the recycling centre. I strongly recommend you have a plastic tray or something as well, because the spillage that's inevitably going to come the first few times you do this, and that's why we also need gloves, is going to be very, very difficult to get off the pavement outside your house. Even little drips of oil can be a real problem, so have a rag on hand, and use a funnel to decant into the top of your waste oil. On the subject of funnels, I'm also going to put the new oil into this to introduce it into the engine, because when you're pouring from a big container like that bad boy there, it does tend to drip and dribble over the oil over the top of the engine, which is messy to clean up. So little funnel, dirty oil funnel, catch pan, waste container. One last thing, this one's really important: duct tape. Now, this is the bit that everyone tends to forget when doing this, but bear in mind that you might not be the only person with this vehicle who has a key, and if someone else comes along and tries to run it with no oil in the engine, it is going to do irreparable damage. It's a total write-off situation. So we're going to put some duct tape over the ignition key slot just to prevent that from happening. Now, just as an aside, at this point it's useful to have taken it out for a run recently, because the warm oil comes out more quickly and easily than cold oil. However, don't make it so hot that you burn yourself. So just a quick run around the block, enough to warm it up, and then we're going to tape over the ignition to stop anyone accidentally firing the engine up and killing it, and then we can get on with the replacement. Simple. Okay, so for the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume that the splash guard is actually already off the bottom of your engine. If not, this thing removes. It's just 12mm bolts, I think, 12 or 13mm bolts, pretty sure it's 12, and there's 7 of them. Nice and easy to remove. I'll cover that in another video. Okay, so bearing in mind that we're working here with a Volvo D5, you've probably got one of these plastic covers on the top. They are held on by 2 ball joints effectively and a bit of friction. So it's easy enough to put your hand under one end, give it a pull, hand under the other end, give it a pull, and it just lifts off. They connect on here and here. I say 2, actually I tell a lie. One here, and then there's another 2 at the back. One here and one here, so there's 4 in total, 2 at the front, 2 at the back. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start with the oil filter. The reason for this is that if something goes wrong with the oil change, your car is stranded. If something goes wrong with the filter, you could stick the old one back in. Let's say you've accidentally bought the wrong size, or they've given you the wrong size of the oil auto factors or whatever, and you need to abandon it and stick the original one back in. Not ideal, but not the end of the world. So the first thing I'm going to do, as I say, is I'm going to work away and get the oil filter itself changed. So for this, it's going to be messy. So I've got a bit of rag, I'm going to put that down here, that drip onto that, and we're going to remove the filter. Now, to remove the filter housing on the Volvo D5, you need a 36mm socket. I'm pretty sure the only other application of a 36mm socket on this engine is the crank pulley, but stand to be corrected on that point. You have to have one for this anyway. An extension bar and some kind of ratchet or T-bar, doesn't really matter. Now, I'm going to just gently twist this off. I'm not going to lean it over, I'm not going to pull to the side. I'm going to use one hand to stabilise it, and I'm kind of pushing against this to keep it vertically, and pushing with my other hand at the other end. Really important to keep it vertical, particularly in this case because it's a plastic fitting, so it's more likely to deform and round off. Not a lot of torque on this, we'll just gently twist it. Here we go, keep it as vertical as possible, and you can see it rotating off now at the bottom. Now, as soon as that's actually started turning, you no longer need the T-bar or the ratchet, whatever you've got on there. We can twist that off until it comes loose at the bottom, and then we can just remove the socket. We'll need that for refitting, of course. We can do the rest by hand. Remember, this is going to have the filter attached to it. It is going to be messy, so have everything that you need on point. With that in mind, here's the box. So we've got the replacement O-ring, we've got the picker tool to remove the original O-ring, we've got the new filter. Okay, so let's lift this out and have a look and see what we're dealing with. Just zoom in on this a little bit. Just drip that on there. We can have a look here. Now, This is the plastic fitting with the 36mm socket. It's just a bell top that goes onto the container here. There's a pipe in the bottom of that container that squirts the oil up through the middle, and you'll notice there's an O-ring around the inside of here, so it's going to pop when it goes on. And there's another one of those at the top. So I'm just going to take this out of here and pop it out. Gloves not optional at this point, this is a filthy job. Here we go. I'll just dry that off on my rag so that you can see what's going on. So we've got a rubber O-ring here, there's a rubber O-ring here, and basically they seat on this pipe in the middle, and in here, I'm just going to need to move the camera to show you this one. That pipe in there. Okay. So back up to the top. So we've got our new O-ring. Really important to make sure that this goes in nice and cleanly. I'm just going to quickly wipe around the old dirty contaminated oil in the top of the housing here, get it as clean and pristine as we can. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a bit of oil from the container to lubricate the new O-ring so it sits in nice and cleanly. In my last video, and I'm sure there were some people clenching when I did it, in the last video I used some of the old dirty oil because I was already covered in it, and inevitably that oil was going to have to be changed in very short order anyway. So, open the oil. The old filter removed and effectively thrown away. It's a very good idea just to compare like for like, make sure that you actually have the right type, the right shape, size, connections before you go ahead and throw this away, because you might need to reuse it in a scrape. I'm just going to put that down in my oil collection pan. Okay, so here's the filter again. So the O-ring itself that we're about to replace with that nice fresh one sits in a groove. It shouldn't sit across the top here, it should actually sit in between these two plastic rails. And if you look at the side here, there's a little cutout, and the purpose for that cutout is to allow you to get your little picker tool underneath and pop it off. Now in this case this one's actually broken anyway, so it's nice and easy to lift off, but that allows you to just pull it out. Okay, so it's important when we put the new one back in to make sure that it sits in that groove, so that there is nice contact all the way down on the inside of this flat section, the lip here on the inside of the oil filter housing. So, remembering with this filter there is an O-ring at both ends. Okay, that O-ring needs to pop onto the pipe in there, and it will be an audible pop when you push it in correctly. Okay, it will still twist around, no issues with that. And what we're going to do now is we're going to, with nice clean gloves, so just as best I can clean off a finger. I have opened the oil, I'm going to stick my finger into the fresh oil, nice and clean, and we're going to lubricate this new O-ring. Keep it as clean as we possibly can. Just thread that over. They go on nice and easily. As they've been heated up in the engine, it might break taking it off, but that's not a problem. You get a fresh one every time. Okay, so that's now in its groove, ready to go. That's now fitted in place, and this O-ring here is ready to receive the end of the pipe in the bottom of the housing. So all we have to do now, and do this finger tight to begin with, is relocate it. Now at this point we haven't taken the old oil out of the engine in a scrape, and though it would be to the detriment of the new filter, we could just switch the engine on now and drive off. After we take the oil out, not so much. I'm just giving this a quick wipe around here, and remember we need to tighten this up. we're going to wind this in again, stabilising to keep it as vertical as possible whilst rotating around that until it's roughly wrist tight. Now I say wrist tight, don't go bonkers. It's plastic, it doesn't need to be tight, it just needs to be tight enough that no oil's going to come squirting around the top, and the O-ring keeps it all sealed anyway. So don't even hold it on the end of the ratchet. My advice would be twist it in like that. Okay, if you can, if you do happen to have a torque wrench, if you can borrow one, all well and good. Torque settings on the top of the cap itself, also the direction in which you need to torque it, helpfully enough. But that's done, that's the filter changed. Okay, so moment of truth. Be sure at this point you have a new gasket or a replacement sump plug with the gasket attached onto it. Be sure that you have the oil sufficient to fill the system up at least to the minimum level, otherwise you're going to be walking into a garage to pick some up. Make sure that the oil filter is nice and secure, and the next job is underneath the car. Now, as I say, for the purposes of this video, I'm assuming that your tray splash guard there is already off, so let's pop underneath the car and have a look, see what's going on down there. Okay, so here we are underneath the car. It's a little bit neat. You can see I've got the catch pan already in place. We're looking at the bottom of the sump. There is the plug that we're going to be taking off. Now, I am not a fan of doing it this way, but I want this video to be absolute beginner's level, so what I'm doing, rather than using socket sets and 6-point sockets and all the rest that I would usually recommend, I'm going to do this just with a 17mm ring spanner. Okay, so we just need to make sure we've got the right size ring spanner. We're going to just crack that loose. Okay, that's now loose. Should be relatively finger tight. Just going to loosen it off. Now, the oil's not going to come surging out for a couple of reasons. Very deliberately I have left the oil filler cap and the dipstick in place, because what I want to do is ensure this is going to come surging out at the slowest possible pace. We also want the catch pan to be as close to this as possible so it doesn't spill all over the floor, and of course we've got the plastic tray underneath, or plastic sheeting or whatever, to catch any drips. So this should be just a matter of gently and in a very controlled way undoing this. Now, I have a replacement sump plug, you might not. Don't get this stuff on your hands, it's really not good for you. But if you need to catch this, then all well and good. If you don't, we can just let that go. Now, I notice with this one that the sump itself, the gasket rather, actually has stuck to the side of the sump, and it's very important to make sure that that gasket comes off, because a double gasket isn't going to provide the seal that you need. Again, we've got a little picker tool handy, we can use that just to make sure that the old one comes off. Check that afterwards as well, something to just note. Okay, and sooner or later this is going to come splurging forth. Now, I have a replacement bolt for this with a replacement gasket, so I'm just going to let this one fall into the drip tray. I'll worry about it later. But I'm applying a bit of pressure as I'm taking this out, so that when it starts to drip I have full control over it and I know when it's going to start going. Now, this is very important because you don't want this black sludge to go all over your pavement. Okay, so this is now unscrewed all the way, it's nice and loose. I can just let it go. That's going to take a while to run out of there, but what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pop up to the top and I'm going to take the oil filler cap off. I'm going to remove the dipstick from its tube. That will allow air into the top of the engine, and this should come flooding out a little bit more quickly. So we'll leave that to drip for a few minutes. Okay, so we're at the point now of diminishing returns. There's just a tiny little trickle coming out. This is hardly going to make any difference at all. You could wait for hours for it to completely drain, I don't see there's a massive lot of point, to be honest. Making sure that the new gasket is in place. We're just going to pop that back in now, finger tight. Don't drop it into the pool of sludge. That is regrettable and something that you will probably do, and we're just going to tighten this up to finger tight and then nip that up with the spanner. Now these don't take a lot of force. Again, the manuals will probably tell you that there is a specified amount of torque that you need to achieve. Bottom line, as long as it's tight and you've got a nice soft washer on there that'll deform into place, that's the important thing. Form a nice tight seal. It's common sense, really. Now that's not dripping anymore. I am just going to push this tray very, very gently. Remember, you don't want it to slosh all over the floor. Very gently out of the way, just to give myself a little bit more wriggle room here. And we're going to tighten this up again using 17mm. Now remember, you're going to have to take this off at some point, so don't go boogaloo. That is plenty. Just one hand, wrist tight, absolutely fine. It is always worth checking after you've done a job like this, a few hours and a few days later even, just to make sure that it's not dripping. So get it nice and clean after you've finished, and then you'll know if there is any seepage, and if there is, nip it up a little bit more. That is done. So we can now go topside and refill it. To recap, we've done the filter, made sure we've changed the O-ring on the filter as well, nice fresh O-ring, lubricated with clean oil. We've got a new sump plug in there, the oil is out, this is empty currently, so new sump plug with a nice fresh gasket. Never reuse the gasket, they cost pence. Any auto factors will be able to provide you with the right size gasket for your vehicle, and probably a replacement drain plug as well. And you might want to consider, if you are running an older engine like this with say 150, 60, 70,000 miles on the clock, you might want to not just use oil but also use some kind of additive to give it a bit of extra thickness to stop the engine being quite so smoky, but I'll come back to that in a second. So back up top. Okay, so here we are back topside. I am about to add the oil and the stabiliser. I'm going to start with the stabiliser because I want all of this in, and then I'm going to put the oil in gradually to make sure that we don't overfill. At this point, the dipstick is out. That's going to allow it to circulate cleanly down to the bottom of the engine, although it'll level off pretty well. So this is a small spout, so nice and easy to tip in, and you'll see this stuff goes in like treacle. Nice and thick. Now there are lots of videos out there, I'm sure, explaining exactly what it is that this stuff does. Bottom line, this old D5 engine, and I imagine probably quite a lot of others out there, are pretty smoky with normal thin oil in, but with this stuff in, they smoke less, they've got more compression, to my mind more power. I'm just going to pop that in there for a few moments, let that drain, and then we'll get on with the oil. Okay, that's getting there now. Make sure it all comes out. A little bit left in the bottle's not going to kill it, but this stuff is absolutely brilliant. First recommended to me by a guy down at the local auto factors when I had to buy 6.5 litres of oil. He strongly suggested that rather than getting 7 litres of the standard oil, that I ran with 5 of the standard, 1 of these, and then topped up with pretty much whatever, and he was absolutely spot on the money. It's definitely run better since, so I swear by this stuff. You pay money, you take your choice. My recommendation is it is definitely worth a go, especially with an older engine. Heavy duty oil stabiliser. Sticky stuff though, gossamer strands everywhere, so we'll just give that a quick clean up. Right, now there is only a litre in the engine at this point, which means that should the worst come to the worst, and unexpectedly that sump plug popped out or something bizarre and inexplicable like that, then there's still enough room in the collection pan to deal with the seepage. So at this point I'm going to just go back down under the engine and have a look and just make sure that there's no drips at all coming from that replacement sump plug with the new gasket on it. Might need to just nip it up, but we'll just go and check. Here we are back underneath, absolutely bone dry, lovely. Okay, I am going to pop the other 5 litres of oil in there and let's see how we do. Okay, so earlier I showed you my funnel. Simple in terms of what it's going to do. This is going to stop us from spilling oil all down the side here. You don't want to get it down the back because the exhaust manifold down there gets very hot, fire risk and all sorts. I'm going to stick that in there. I'm going to rest that up there, and instead of trying to pour the oil directly into here, and you could pour it into there using a funnel if you really want to, I'm going to pour it into here. Just a little bit easier for my money. Also, if we need to stop at any point, we can easily do so. Here we go. Just decant one into the other, and you'll see it flowing nicely and steadily into the engine. And the funnel catches all the glug 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 drips and spots that would have otherwise gone all over the back of the engine. Okay, the big bottle is now empty. Lovely. And bearing in mind that this brings us to 6 litres, which should be somewhere between halfway and 3/4 of the way up the dipstick. I'm going to pour the rest of that into there. Just let that drain, and we'll move our attention over here to the dipstick. Now the dipstick here was out. I'm just going to push that back in. It can be a bit stiff sometimes because they've got 2 little O-rings at the top here. It's a pressurised crankcase in this particular engine, so you do end up with some exhaust gas blow-by coming out of there. If it's open, it makes a bit of a mess. So really important that you keep this plugged in, and that is why, as I say, it's got those 2 O-rings. It can be a little bit sticky to get out. So we're going to remove the dipstick, and regardless of what it says, we're going to just wipe it. I'm going to put it back in. Now I'm going to remove it again, and this time we can trust what it actually says. And the level, if you can see it, is just there, which is just about 2/5 of the way. 2/5 of the way up here. So I could comfortably drive on that. The engine might be a bit weird, but ultimately it's not going to kill it. So I'm going to need to put about another litre or so in very small bits into this, maybe another 500ml, just to make sure that we're coming somewhere approaching 3/4 to 4/5 of the way up the scale. You don't want to be right at the top of the scale. Approaching the top is absolutely fine. Okay, so we're going to come back over here, bearing in mind I've been using Adtech 530 and the fuel additive. I'm going to top it up with just a little 1 litre here, 530 as well. This is all fresh oil. I am not going to put all of this in. I'll just turn you around here again, same deal as before. I'm going to be pouring this into the jug. I'm putting about half of it in there. I can always pour it from the jug back into this, so that's roughly half of this bottle now in the jug, but pulled up here, you'll see. So now, back over here before I pour any more of this in. Dipstick comes out again. A little bit more round, here we go. So the dipstick comes out. Again, I'm going to clean it. stick it back in all the way down, including those double O-rings, and then bring it out again. So now the oil level is here, which is exactly halfway up the scale. So I think 6.5 litres is absolutely dead on. I'm going to stick the rest of what's in this jug in. Okay, so that's now poured. Let's back over here a second. These things come with a handy little cap to go on the end, and one to go on the top to stop any nasties getting in there, so that will be absolutely clean the next time. One of the problems of using a funnel for this is that they can easily get contaminated, so I don't have to worry about that. So back over the dipstick one more time, hopefully this will be the last. Pull it out, clean it off, back in, let it just sit there a minute, and let's see. So the oil level is now exactly 4/5 of the way up the scale, and I am very happy with that. Going to leave it there. So at this point we'll just give the oil filler cap gasket a quick look. This one's a little bit worn, there's no big grooves in it, so that should be fine. Remember, it's a pressurised engine. We'll just screw that back on. Oop. The right way up though, very important to have the symbols the right way, and we can start the cleanup. So one more double check around the engine. We're going to just check this is on, this is in, underneath the engine. Let's just pop down there now. There are still no drips coming from the sump plug. Happy days. So now we can deal with the oil. Okay, so let me park you there. I am just going to reach under this vehicle and very, very slowly pull out the tray. Remember, if you pull it too quickly, it's going to slosh and slop around, and you do not want 6.5 litres of black slime all over your tarmac. That is really not a good look for a driveway. So here we go. Horrendous stuff. Time for a bit of clean up. Gloves. Okay, so here we go. This is a messy old job. You have to be very, very careful not to spill. Okay, here we go. So I've got the waste oil container. I have a funnel to go in there, which is going to try and tip all over my shoes as I'm filling it up. And both of my hands are going to be fully occupied holding that 6.5 kilograms of sludge. So I am going to improve my chances somewhat. It's not going to stick to the funnel, but at least around the funnel and remind it where it's supposed to be. Not particularly elegant, but it works. So at least I can rely on that not going anywhere now. It is very, very important you don't get this stuff all over the floor. So here we go. Adjust myself so I'm always holding this over the tray. There is 10 litres more space in that container than I need for this oil, so I don't have to worry about it overflowing. All the junk that's currently in that catch just afterwards. Just make sure nothing else falls out. I'm going to call that job done. Now remember that this is going to drip all over the place. It already has, in fact. So we'll just do a quick one up. Clean the bottom of that properly afterwards. And let that drain. This needs to go in the bin. Gloves to join them. Everything else back on the shelf, along with that half a litre there for next time. Perfect. So there you go. Fully end-to-end, total beginner's guide to changing the oil in the filter on a Volvo D5. Anyone can do this, just be careful. Got to make sure that you have the oil, any additives you need, an oil filter with an O-ring and a replacement sump washer. Make sure that you've got a big enough container to catch stuff in and an easy way to decant it afterwards, and improve your chances of not spilling all over the engine using some kind of funnel. Make sure before you do any pouring of anything that everything's nice and secure, and if you can't, duct tape. There you go. So let's say, if that's been useful to you, please like and subscribe, click the bell button to get notified of upcoming videos, and I will see you next time. Take it easy, guys.